there are a handful of UFO investigators that I truly can say I trust. One of them, of course, is with us now. Paula Harris, a Italo-American investigative reporter who has literally devoted her life and career to investigating UFOs. Paula, always a pleasure to see you.
Thank you, George. It's a pleasure to be with you.
You have written a new book called Conversations with Colonel Corso. It's an amazing story about someone I'm going to have you describe for us in a second. And of course, Colonel Corso was the co-author of the book The Day After Roswell, about his case and his episodes. But tell me about your involvement with him. How did that all happen?
It's serendipitous. There was a room ready for 3 days, and it was a room next to Philip Corso.
No.
Yes, but I didn't know that.
Serendipity at its best.
Right next to him. And do you know, George, nobody could get to him because Simon & Schuster kind of had him sequestered.
Yeah.
So nobody could get near him because everybody in the world wanted interviews. And here I am in the room next to him. So I jumped in the car, went over to the UFO museum. I'm there and I'm trying to, he's on the stage doing a press conference, and I'm trying to think, how will I get to him? And this blonde guy comes up to me and says, "You're from Italy?" And I said, "Yes." He says, "Ask my father a question in Italian." I said, "That's your father up there?"
Love it.
And he said, "Yeah, ask him." And I said, "No, you know, the cameras are all pointed." And he takes his hand, he pushes me into the crowd. I have no choice. So I asked him about the Santilli autopsy footage. You remember that Santilli footage of the alien autopsy?
That's right.
And I asked it in Italian, and he said to me, he said, "You know," he said, "one of the artifacts I had in the nut file that he calls the file of artifacts that were given to him from General Trudeau,"
Okay.
he said, "was this black lens that everybody thinks is the ET's eye. It's not. It's a light collector." And he said, "I had this black lens in that file," and he said, and he's saying this on the stage, and he said, "We used to put it up to our eyes and walk up and down the halls of the Pentagon, and we could see the furniture in the dark."
Amazing.
And so I said, oh, you know, he not only answered a question about an artifact he had, and then later he told me that they developed night screening devices from that, but he answered a question that I've had about the Santilli footage, because they peel off this lens.
They peeled it off, that's right.
So, you know, my whole life is trying to connect these dots.
We thought it was the membrane of the eye.
Yes, and everybody thinks that the little gray alien has these big, huge black eyes. And it's really a lens of light collector. So anyway, Colonel Corso later on explained to me about the extraterrestrial biological entity, but he said to me, "I want to speak to you." But I didn't know when he said, "I want to speak to you," that he'd be coming out of his room right next door to me. And that's when I was able to get an interview, and that's when I was able to invite him to Italy. And he came to Italy, and that's my relationship with him was in Italy, because George, I don't know if you know, he didn't speak in the United States very often.
No,
and
not a lot.
Not a lot. And before he got a chance to do very much, a lot of our own colleagues went ahead and really went ahead and attacked him for what he said, and they didn't understand the importance. And in my book, I have all his records from his military records.
Priceless.
Yeah, actually, I have his military records. He was at Fort Riley, Kansas in 1947. He was at White Sands as a commander of a missile battalion. He was the head of intelligence in Rome for the CIC in 1945. He was all the places he said he was.
In 1998, Colonel Philip Corso was in Rome, Paula, talking about extraterrestrials.
When I was chief of the Fork Technology Division, I went to the general one day, and it was agreed that we would start no projects in the Army, in our division, our area, with the money we had in the organization, on those three items: crop circles, mutilations, and abductions. But we would watch them. We would keep getting the reports and watch them, but start no projects, because our main objective in those days was weapons of war. We called it to advance the competitive edge of the Army. Even the beings, it didn't matter to us whether they were real or not, and it didn't matter if they came here by accident or design. But our motto was, if they're real, we're going to be ready. We're not going to sit here like stupid beings and say they aren't around. We have to work on assumptions that they are there. And we have to work on the assumption that they might be enemies. So we have to be ready.
Compelling individual. I want you, Paula, to tell our audience exactly who Colonel Philip Corso was.
Well, because we were in Italy, we had an advantage. We could look at his background, and we realized the importance of his role during right after World War II in 1945, that he was the head of the intelligence in Rome for the CIC. Okay. And when I had him come to Rome, I dragged him all over the streets, having him show me not only where his office was, I had him show me where he stayed, which was the Ambasciatore Hotel.
Did you want him to authenticate these
yes.
things? That's why?
Well, that's how I do it, because I'm a field researcher. All the work I've ever done, I've done in person. Yeah, and we walked into the Ambasciatore Hotel, and it was all different. He said, no, the elevator was here. He said, the bar was here, everything was, and I called somebody, and I said, who's here in 1945? And
to verify this stuff.
And they did.
Yeah.
And he was telling the truth. And then, this will make you laugh. We went to Via Veneto, and he said he had had some paranormal experiences near Via Sicilia. He said there was a bar where a singer used to sing with a white piano. It's a restaurant now, and I walked in and I said, were there military men in 1950? Was there a white piano? And the man says, go down 4 floors. And we walked down into the basement. There was the white piano.
There's the piano
and there's pictures of all military men on the wall. I'm getting chills as I'm talking about this, because then we walked down Via Sicilia, because Colonel Corso was also involved with finding out information about communism, communists, about, the subversive angle.
Well, that was his mission.
That was what he was about. He was an intelligence person. And he's not just somebody off the street that comes up with a story. And so we had that verification, and the book has his military records of the times. What people have to remember, he wasn't at Roswell. So even though the book is called The Day After Roswell, it's stupid to go after him about Roswell.
Right.
Because Colonel Corso's first exposure to this was at Fort Riley, Kansas. We put him on The Tonight Show, and I have some photos of that, with Maurizio Costanzo, and he told him, he said, I was at Fort Riley, Kansas, this sensitive cargo was coming through. It went to the veterinary quarters. I'm thinking, the beings go to the veterinary quarters. It went to the veterinary quarters. One of the guards there said, Colonel, come in and see this. You'll see this cargo. And Colonel opened up the casket, and this kind of, he said it was a wooden box. He said he saw a being lying in fluid there. And he describes the being. And of course, I have that description in the book. And he said,
an alien gray?
Yes.
Yeah.
Big head, looked like a child.
Yeah.
Every time he talked, I audio taped him.
Okay.
I don't want to make mistakes.
Right.
So everything that's in the book comes from audio tape, which I own. And he talked about seeing this being, and he said, I knew I wasn't supposed to be there, so I put the tarpaulin back, I put the top back, he said, and I told the guard to get out because we weren't really supposed to be there, and he said that he was told that the cargo came from Roswell. So he said he put it in the back of his mind for later. It's incredible, because all of this, all of our lives actually, have incidents that we understand later. And so I'm convinced, though, that it isn't necessarily a body from Roswell. It could be that Roswell, or around that time, there were several crashes. So, George, I'm going to go on record, because I brought forth the 1945 San Antonio, New Mexico crash, that there was not one crash. Roswell is not the only crash.
But at this point, he hasn't been assigned to investigate any of this, right?
All coincidence.
When does that start, and how does that start for him?
That starts during the Kennedy administration, during the 1960s. He was at the Research and Development Desk at the Pentagon.
All right.
Now, we've got to remember, he's at the Pentagon.
I've been there.
And he's working with General Trudeau. And Trudeau comes and says, well, I'm going to give you some artifacts. What I want you to do, he said, is go out into industry. Now, people are going to argue, all this stuff is already out there. That's their main argument. Well, this is the Army. And in 1947 and 48, it was the Army Air Force. So you don't think the Air Force started it before? So in 60, the Army had this tray of artifacts.
Things,
Yeah, things.
pieces of equipment.
Yeah, he said he talked about a pen he had that he thought the batteries were dead, and he took it to Fort Belvoir and put long low waves on it, and this laser came out.
It was a laser pointer.
It was,
right?
it was a laser that cut and sutured. There's a letter in my book to a doctor here in Durango, Colorado, that wrote to him and said, what about that thing? And Colonel Corso said, that thing cut and sutured, which meant it closed the wound.
Closed it.
And,
Sealed it right up.
Sealed it right up.
Yeah.
And he said, we had that. He said, we had 2 of those. He explains to the doctor.
Sounds like Star Trek, doesn't it?
This stuff is amazing, but can you imagine the money that could be made of it?
So he has been given this assignment, take this material out to industry and try to get it duplicated.
Right.
And that's what he did.
He did that, and in my book, because I could audio tape him, he names the German scientists that came with him. I didn't know German scientists came with him. They were working with the paperclip guys.
Yeah. Oh, I'm
And he
sure.
talks about Herman Oberth a lot, and he says that they used to be really afraid of him when they used to go to places. He mentions Bell Labs. And he said when he'd walk in, he'd have to see what they completed, and if they completed it, he had envelopes full of money. That's
how he paid them?
That's how, no paper trail. No paper trail. And he talks about these envelopes. And later on, he tried to get some verification of the payment. And of course, you know, they're very
payment.
careful. No payment, never done, never happened. And he, in the audio tape that he gave me, he told me, he said, you know, if we didn't do the night screening devices, our soldiers couldn't have seen the enemy in Vietnam. I mean, he takes credit for that, and I think a lot of people are very upset about the credit he took for what the job was. But he thought he was doing good, but it was for war purposes.
Right. As he said in that
Yeah,
clip,
it
that
was
was
for
the mission.
war. And that's the military-industrial complex that everybody talks about, because the secret can't be or won't be released as long as money is made from this stuff. And it's probably still going on. So people need to understand the whole entire picture before they go after Corso. Because he said he used to go back to those companies, see at what point they were. Down deep in his heart, he said, you know, when the Army would put that out into the general public, and I think just like NASA with all the spin-offs from space, he said that the American people could have it.
Did he give them a time limit to try to perfect this?
Yes. Not only that, it had to be perfect. Because he said what would happen is they'd want to do a second generation of it and ask for more money. And he said that was a way they'd do it. He said they'd say, can we do the state of the art, or can we upgrade it, or whatever?
Right.
And he'd go, and that was a way of getting more money. And he was he was the money guy. So he basically, controlled that. Everything in the book are his own words. And there is a mandate in the book where Colonel Corso said, look, I'm 83 years old, Paula. He said, unless you go ahead and tell the world. He said, I'm going to give you and Adriano some very important papers. He said, unless you go on and tell the world, he said, they will not know about this.
I'm 83 years old, so I have to get you younger ones to carry the story.
Name, what do you name him?
Yeah, Paola and Adriano. And I want you to do it. Like today, Mauricio did a pretty good job.
Yeah.
A couple times, he continued what I said, and that's what I wanted to do. Pick it up and continue what I say.
And I said, but I'm not one of your soldiers. And he said, yes, you are. And he said, not only that, but you're going to learn how to do this. So I have an obligation, George. I have an obligation. I mean, when people tell me to go ahead and do something. Yeah, and I thought, well, you know, for whatever backlash, whatever happens, at least I did it. It's his words. There's no opinion of mine there. I spent 2 years with him. We brought his grandchildren over, and I've got to be clear about this, George. The motivation was only the grandchildren. For Nick, Philip, and Andrew, he said, I am telling the truth to the world, because they asked me, Granddad, did you ever meet E.T.?
And he wanted them to know for sure.
He wanted them to know for sure. Plus, I mean, they had made a deal, Trudeau and him, that the last one alive would tell the truth, would come forward with this. And of course, he prepared the book to come out. And it came out at the 50th anniversary.
And he did a good job telling the truth.
He felt that it was time that the world knew.
Was he haunted by becoming a whistleblower? Did anything come back at him?
All kinds of stuff.
Like what?
He had visitations from the intelligence community, and he said, gentlemen, you know that's 25 years down the line, 25 years has passed. He had our own people questioning him, because he didn't, Colonel Corso wasn't at Roswell, he was at Fort Riley,
Right.
Kansas. We have a whole slew of Roswell researchers.
He was handed the goods.
And there were some discrepancies in the book, because it was co-written. So the thing is that Colonel Corso's real manuscript is The Dawn of a New Age. It has been printed in Italy and has reprinted this year when I was there. You can get it online. And those were his handwritten notes. My book, by the way, has been released in Italian. So when you have two people putting it together, there's some discrepancies. And you just need one little discrepancy to discount the whole, throw the baby out with the bathwater. Well, we have high tenacity fibers. We have the laser. I'm not sure about the surgical. There's a story in the book that might interest people about the Russians having the same, instrument, and then you could buy it in Russia, and American doctors went over there and tried to buy it, and then the Russians sued them.
They pulled it back.
Yeah. So I'm sure that whatever happened here happened also in Russia. But of course, people will argue the integrated circuit was already being worked on, all these things were being worked on, but remember that the Air Force also has its labs, and when you have the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy, all in competition for contracts,
Sure.
He says the competitive edge of the Army, so Colonel Corso was always Army, Army, Army. A lot of it, and God knows what there is that we don't know about.
Where do you think those artifacts, the original ones, might be today?
Well,
Who's got 'em?
I have no idea. I can never answer that, but I know that Trudeau and Corso had a long conversation, and they agreed that the last one alive would tell the truth, and I don't know where it went from there.
How many years, Paula, of advancement do you think Corso gave us with the downcraft technology? Hundreds of years? I mean, at what point would we have had fiber optics, the ability to, see in the dark, the surgical instrument? I wonder how many years in advance he gave us technology.
Well, that would be only a guess if I gave you that. However, can you imagine if that's true? If the beings or the visitors haven't given us technology in the past? How we got to where we got today, that's even a bigger question. Were we either downloaded, and I have a lot of questions about Tesla,
Sure.
and I have a lot of questions about Einstein, and I have a lot of
Edison and all these people.
guys. I'm wondering, have we been helped? That would be a whole other show. I mean, have we been helped?
Well, and maybe helped indirectly. Maybe they were able to send thoughts into these humans' heads. So maybe the Einsteins and the Teslas weren't directly aware of an extraterrestrial presence or intervention, but that it was in there.
Yeah, and they seem like geniuses. Now, one story I will tell you because of the clip is when he talked about that helmet, he said that was on the being, and what happened is they found it on the being, and the being would put its hands on the control, the console, and could drive the ship with his mind. In other words, that the ship was. And he said that they had several of those bands. It wasn't just one. He said they had several. And I'm wondering if the being, and he said to me, the being and the craft were one. And he said, we were more, and he said, that's an extraterrestrial biological entity. He said, that thing was a clone, was a machine, was a clone. He said, what we were worried about was who created them. And if they look like us, they could be walking in the halls of the Pentagon, and we couldn't we didn't even know it. And he was so concerned about it. So his vision of the alien was more of a human, Star Trek-y vision of beings creating something to travel in space like the clone. And he said, his last words, even in the book, are, we were looking at the artifacts, the craft. He said the biggest gift they gave us was the being.
We are told that there are many different species of extraterrestrials. Did Colonel Corso ever get into that? How many there were and what they were?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked me that question because he said 52, and then I've been working with Clifford Stone, and he says 57. Colonel Corso said there were 52 different species.
Different species.
And I asked Clifford Stone just recently, I said, why are you saying 57? And Stone answers me, well, I had a manual, he said, that showed 57, and when there was a crash retrieval, I had to look up the body of one of these to see that we didn't kill him when we went to, to do first aid.
Well, of the 52 or 57, we talk about Nordiques, the reptilians, the Greys. How many more could there be? What are they?
Yeah, but George, those are the boxes we put them in. The Nordics aren't all Nordics. The people in South America are seeing people with platinum blonde hair and brown eyes. And they're 10 feet tall. And it's not like a Nordic you might see like a Pleiadian that would be 6 feet tall. It's just like if they came to this planet and they said there's white people, there's black people, and there's yellow people. But there are variations, all these.
Absolutely.
And we tend to put 3 boxes of 3 species, and and there's just all kinds. Look at the Virginia case. Where do you put that little guy? In Brazil, he had reddish skin, he had big eyes, and Roger Lear worked on that
Looked like
case.
a leprechaun.
Yeah,
actually.
I mean, there's all kinds of life in the universe.
You have had the incredible ability to have known incredible people in the UFO field. Bud Hopkins, the late Dr. John Mack, and so many others. How would you put Philip Corso in that group?
He's a real whistleblower.
You have no doubts.
Whistleblowers that are whistleblowers are people that risk their lives, that that have repercussions in their families, that have. Before he died, and I wrote about this, Colonel Corso was very sorry he even wrote the book.
Really?
Yeah, he said, "My God," he said, "I've gotten more."
It was a bestseller.
It doesn't matter, he said, "I've gotten more criticism from the UFO community." He said, "I've had to defend myself everywhere in the United States, not in Italy. Italy treated him like a king because Italy..."
People didn't believe him?
People questioned him. They didn't believe him. They went public with lectures against him. And then when Paul Hellyer came out,
Former Defense Minister of Canada,
2005, when he said the famous words, UFOs are as real as airplanes over our head. He had done this because he had read the Corso books, so people were angry at Paul. And Paul told me, because he's a very close friend of mine, he said, Paula, I was former defense minister around the same time, because McNamara was defense minister during the Kennedy administration, and Paul was during the Trudeau. And he said, I called. He said, actually, one of his relatives had given him the name of a general here. And he called to ask if Corso's book was real. And the answer from the military man was, it's not only real, there's more.
Wow.
And so Paul said, when I heard that, he said, that has, and I agree with this is my philosophy, it has monetary implications, it has psychological implications, it has sociological implications for planet Earth. And actually, that's my definition of exopolitics, is basically you can study UFOs, but it's not entertainment. It's all the implications of the disclosure for the planet. The sociological, the mental, the psychological. We have to rewrite our whole entire history.
Was there any time during these conversations with Colonel Corso that you recorded, did you think, I don't know about this guy?
Never. Never. The only thing, I felt bad for him because he was very sorry. He regretted
doing what he did.
Yeah, especially in Korea. He was a military man in Korea. He told me, he explained the war, explained Douglas MacArthur's decision to stop the war. He said they made a predator out of me. He says, I was basically a military man that thought I was doing right. He said, but it was really interesting because at the end of the book, he gives 4 possibilities for our planet, the beings as enemies, because that was his job.
Well, you had just described what Corso was like when he looked in that little casket and saw one of the beings.
Well, the body, the head really wasn't that big, but in portions of the body, a small body, it looked big. And the eyes, there was no nose or anything like that. It had spindly legs. So that was about it, because I didn't have any autopsies. And I just put it off, because I figured, well, maybe someday I'll get corroboration and be able to evaluate. Later, I got my hands on the autopsy report in 1961 when I took charge of the Foreign Technology Division from Walter Reed Hospital, our own laboratory. So there I start putting it all together.
What did you read in the autopsy reports?
Well, the nature of the body inside. Because before that I never knew that. They did an autopsy and they cut it open, all the brain and all. And the brain was different, and most of the body was different. But no nose, no mouth, no ears, no vocal cords, no digestive system, no sex organs. So then we came to the conclusion that it was a humanoid clone. So that's, and as I say, when I saw the body, there was nothing else to go on. Later on, though, I got the autopsy reports that experts had done.
He's believable.
Why would he ever make at 83 years
would
old?
make
Why
that
would
up?
it make up?
Who would make that
I mean,
up?
people aren't using logic. The biggest criticism I have is a lot of this stuff is logical. It's not belief or, their UFOs are real. It's not a religion. I mean, it's like, it's if people would use logic and they would look at the reasoning, the intention of the people. Yeah, that was the time, you asked me the importance, that I realized why the secret was secret. I thought it was because the Vatican didn't want it. I thought it was religion. I thought it was they were so bad.
You've since found out the Vatican doesn't care. They don't want to hide it.
It's about money. It's about
power,
free energy. If they, we're talking about a little pen, but I'm sure they figured out that craft doesn't use gas or oil.
Yeah, exactly.
And Dr. Stephen Greer is my hero, and I will say this publicly. And when he says we had the technology in the 1950s, we could solve all the world's problems, he's not lying. It's true.
But you can't make money with that.
No.
That's
Not
the
only
thing.
that, we have to finish one era of fossil before this other era. But this other era could come out too late.
They have to figure out, how do you make cash on free energy? How do you make money on free energy?
That's what I always say. Your free energy is not going to be free, but it might save our ecological. Because I'm working with Latin American contactees now, and I've been in Chile, and I've been in Argentina, and I've been all over Latin America, and the message is coming from the beings that we're going to have an ecological disaster, and it's going to happen soon. And so I'm going, okay, well, that makes sense. Are people even paying attention to the fact that this planet is changing? And so there's a lot of stuff about that. And Colonel Corso did have a contact with a being when he was in the head of a missile battalion. It's in the beginning of the book. It is an interview he gave me at Roswell. When he came into my room, he sat down and he took a little napkin and he said, I had this encounter with this being. He said, 1957, he said, who couldn't take off because the radars were on. And he said, I saw this craft, I walked out to it, I saw the being come out of the cave. Colonel Corso was Italian, he was Sicilian, he pulls out his gun, he points it at the being, he says, friend or foe, and he says, Paula, guess what he said? And I said, he said, neither. And he said, that's what he said. And he said,
I would melt the gun in his hand. That's what he
the
should
being
have done.
said, please shut down your radars because so I could go. And the Colonel Corso said they were ordered to shut down their radars there anyway during the certain parts of the day, but he hadn't done it. And he said, what do you have to offer me? And you've heard this, George. The being mentally said, a new world if you can take it.
Right, if you can take it.
So he writes this down. And you want to know what Paula Harris did? She wouldn't print that story, even though he gave it to me. And I could almost cry about this because I thought if I printed the story that his credibility would be damaged. And he gave it to me even with the napkin that he wrote, Paula, do you know what a new world if you could take it means? And I said, I have no idea, Colonel, but I don't want this story. I don't want contact because in those days I stayed away from that. I said, give me the back engineering story. That's all I want. And that shows my censorship And I will confess, I was really sad about until after he died, which was 2 years later, and we printed the story with all the images, which I
Right.
have in my book.
Are you familiar with the story of Valiant Thor?
Yes.
What do you think of that?
I
You
think
it's real?
yes. And the only reason I think it's real,
This, by the way, is an extraterrestrial from Venus who came here during the Eisenhower administration, wanted to meet and give us vital information, and we decided we're not going to talk to the guy.
I've had to do extensive research about this because I started researching all the human-type aliens from the Giant Rock Group, from Menger, from Van Tassel and Adamski and so forth. As I'm doing that research, and I'm going to those places, you
Right.
know, I went to Giant Rock, I talked to the people that knew Van Tassel, I brought people back out there and so forth. I studied Howard Menger, and a friend of mine has photos of Howard Menger with these beings that were in the Wendell Stevens collection that he
Right,
has.
right.
And Val Thor is one of the people sitting under the orchard in Howard Menger's.
He looks
yeah.
human, right?
He's got three of them with. He's got Jill, the woman, and he's got Don, his brother, and he's sitting there taking notes. We were even able to look at the notes to see what he was writing. And I have the audio tape of August Roberts, who was a photographer, who's talking to Wendell Stevens, who I consider the best researcher in the world. Because he did the whole entire planet. He didn't do the American situation, he did South American. And I have the audio tape where the photographer is saying, well, I'm walking around this orchard, he says, and Menger tells me there are 3 ETs, but I've got to guess who they are because he won't tell me who they are. And he says, these 2 were overdressed, these 3 were overdressed. And they were sitting there, and he took those famous pictures
And
of
they clearly look human.
yeah,
right?
and but they're not dressed like everybody else because this is an orchard and everybody is very, you know,
Yeah.
casual, and they got suits on.
Why did we refuse to meet with Thor? Why did our government not want to get involved? Publicly, at least.
Well, the only thing I can tell you is what Frank Stranges says, who is the one stranger at the
wrote the
Pentagon.
story, yeah.
He told the story. Frank Stranges said that when he approached, when Valiant Thor approached President Eisenhower and told him not only that we could live longer, that we should change the way we think. Eisenhower said, it's out of my hands. The whole entire idea of changing our, you know, the way we eat, the way we live and so forth is in the hands of the pharmaceutical industry, and it would go down. In other words, our economy is built on the pharmaceutical industry, the war industry, and different industry. It's about money. It's about that it's already in place, and to destroy that at a time, which was the 1950s,
Sure.
it'd be impossible. I mean,
So they rejected him because of that.
he couldn't do anything. It's like Eisenhower, apart from anything, I'm convinced the president really has no real power to do a whole bunch.
You don't think so?
No, I mean, Eisenhower, what could he do? Do you remember his last speech?
Oh, about the military-industrial
He
complex?
said, beware of the
warned people.
military-industrial
He
complex.
warned everybody. Jacques Vallée, the researcher,
Yeah.
claims that most of these ETs are interdimensional, not physical. What do you think of that?
I think he's absolutely right. And so is John Keel, Mothman Prophecies, you know, John Keel's work. But you know, George, I'm glad you bring this up because people should be reading this stuff. I mean, not everything is on internet. All Jacques Vallée's books, he calls it a dimensionality or phenomenology. He talks about, and Grant Cameron talks about this too, because I have long conversations with Grant. I think he's amazing. It is all connected. Even Hynek said to me, Paula, even though you're studying nuts and bolts, he said, there's a lot connected with the paranormal. Do not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Well, he was right. He
Yeah.
was right. But it took him a long time to learn that and to get to that point because Hynek, of course, was the skeptic with Project Blue Book.
And he was a scientist. He was an astronomer. Can you imagine an astronomer looking up there going, well, you know, those aren't all stars.
But afterwards, he changed, didn't he?
Yes.
He changed in a big way.
We all did.
Yeah.
We all did.
When you started investigating this as an investigator, was there a wow moment for you where something just hit you like a burst of light and you went, oh my God, this is real. Did that ever hit you like that?
I'm a teacher and I have a master's in education, and being with Hynek, I knew it was real. Because Hynek was an astronomer, he was a scientist, and I used to travel with him. And
During his Project Blue Book days? Or
no,
after,
when he did CUFOS, Center for UFO Studies.
Right.
Both Don Schmidt and I were part of CUFOS. Hynek thought, and I don't know if I believe this anymore, that if you could prove it scientifically, you could make people believe.
Well, I think he was right. I think it was right. People tend to believe science. They don't tend to believe hearsay or speculation. What I like about you as an investigator is you're a no-nonsense person. You don't joke about things like this. You get to the nuts and bolts, and you want answers, and you don't stop until you get them. You're a female bulldog, you know? And that's you know, for people in our field, I appreciate that, because if you say it, that saves me from mounds and mounds of work and research that I'd have to do. You've already done it. But there aren't a lot of people like you, Paula, unfortunately.
Well, you know, I ask myself why I'm driven to do this, because you ask me all the time, and I don't think I have a choice. Isn't that weird? I think that at some given point, I was given an assignment.
So let me ask you this as we wrap this up. We assume that Philip Corso is telling the truth. Mm-hmm. You believe he is.
Oh, yeah.
So I believe he is. But what's the end game here, Paula? Why is this all happening?
I don't have a real answer for that, George. I think that what has to happen here is that humanity has to change. And we can't have any dialogue with any ET out there unless we grow up. They basically want us to realize we are part of a greater universe. And they can't talk to us as long as we don't see that consciousness component we have. We are not just skin and bones. I mean, you've done so many shows on all of it. We are divine beings that, like Monsignor Balducci used to say, why would God just create a planet with a bunch of people and that's it?
And as William Henry says, we're light beings.
Yes, we are so much more. And when we can go up a notch, and maybe that's the mission that you say, when we can go up a notch in consciousness, is once they can come and talk to us. And there's another component, and you're probably studying that, when we go out into the stars. Because right now we're stuck on this planet, and we can't do what Gene Roddenberry wanted us to do, to go among the planets and meet our cousins and do all that. So what I'm doing is just archiving the whistleblowers, the real people. I've interviewed everybody in the world. I have 5 books, and on all different levels, I have the audio tapes of all these people, and hopefully this subject will not be ridiculed. It will be in a university someday, and they'll find my books and the audio tapes of the people. So where's the end game? It's about us. It's about us.
Will we get disclosure?
Well, I think we already have it. I don't know. For me, the president doesn't need to say anything. When I'm talking to pilots in France about what they saw, and I'm talking to all these people in different countries about what they experienced, and military people, and you know, that's disclosure. What do you want? Just the president to say it?
What more do you need?
One more. Oh, I mean, if the president says it, then everybody's going to wonder why he said it. So, you know, maybe someday. I don't think that'll happen, only because of the vested interest, again, in the technology that we have. There's a vested interest. I mean, people will ask, when you had these crashes, did you throw everything away? And the answer, you know, is no.
Paula, thanks for being on Beyond Belief.
On March 25th, 1948, the third incident related to one of the so-called flying saucers in New Mexico occurred, as specified in the memo that Goy Hotel sent to the director of the FBI, Edgar Hoover. Although the FBI wanted to dismiss this document as irrelevant, it is shown that it is really very precise. What is stated there is demonstrated by real facts with evidence and witnesses. Scott and Suzanne Ramsey spent decades of their lives investigating this case, gathering all the evidence to present in a book.
It was evening on Wednesday, March 25, 1948, when patrolman Manuel Sandoval followed a strange light in the desert, similar to what had been seen the previous 3 nights in the small town of Cuba, New Mexico. The mysterious light appeared to be an airship or saucer that was moving slowly over New Mexico. Officer Sandoval was determined to uncover the mystery. After several hours on a remote road in Hart Canyon near Aztec, New Mexico, he encountered an unexpected scene. Patrolman Sandoval was surprised that the object could have landed so softly on a clearing in the brush. It was dawn, and 20 men surrounded a strange circular metal ship that lay on a plateau near a gorge. According to their version of the story, they didn't reach the site as quickly as they wanted because a brush fire was close to where they worked and could have threatened the equipment that extracted natural gas from the ground. The workers in the oil and gas industry were fascinated with what they saw. They thought that it was a new type of airplane belonging to the United States Air Force. However, it was strangely shaped. It didn't have wings, nor the form of an airplane. They surmised it was some kind of strategic secret weapon. After all, the military had surprised the world by manufacturing the first atomic bomb and the use of nuclear energy in the area. The ship was metallic and silver in color, but not shiny. Inside, they observed at least 4 small dead bodies in the main cabin. The beings did not look human. It was then that they realized that the reports of flying saucers were real, and that the stories of aliens from another world had crashed in San Antonio, New Mexico, and Roswell. Later, after the military arrived, everyone was questioned, interrogated, and even threatened. Their cameras and film were confiscated. In total, there were between 14 and 16 small dead bodies. The beings were barely 1 meter in height. They all looked burned and dehydrated, and they were wearing odd metallic clothes. Years later, one of the scientists involved thoroughly studied the findings and wrote a book. He presented his conclusions in a conference and revealed specific details of the crashes and beings. Those involved in releasing the information to the public were prosecuted and brought to trial. History would be forgotten for more than 40 years until another investigation was carried out. More details had been found, facts that would confirm the extraordinary case. Then another 20 years had passed, which would be more than 60 years total from the original sightings and discoveries, before a new investigation revealed the names of all those involved. Direct testimonies were obtained, and finally the identities of the scientists who revealed one of the most extraordinary incidents in human history. A ship of extraterrestrial origin was recovered intact with its crew inside, a story that is finally coming to light. Aztec, New Mexico is located just over 100 miles. That's about 180 kilometers away from the discovery of the craft. It was also near the place the first atomic bomb was detonated and tested in 1945. Aztec is located very close to the Los Alamos nuclear power plant, where the first atomic bombs were built. This area is called Aztec because it was named after Aztec archaeological mines that were discovered there.
Estas son las ruinas de Aztec en Nuevo México, conocidas así debido a que los conquistadores las confundieron y pensaron que se trataba de ruinas aztecas. Sin embargo, eran ruinas de la cultura Anasazi, de las llamadas civilizaciones pueblo, que habitaron aquí en Nuevo México. Muy cerca de este lugar, el 25 de marzo de 1948, una nave descendió suavemente sobre una meseta. En su interior fueron encontrados los cadáveres de 14 seres.
This is a story in which virtually all the witnesses have died. Curiously, all those who witnessed the ship and saw its occupants would literally become millionaires, respected men in their community who knew how to keep silent. However, one Doug Nolan decided to talk before he passed away. Here is a testimony recorded in 2003. At the time of his experience in 1948, Doug was just 19 years old.
I looked.
And there was only 4.
There's just 4. And that's what the book says.
And it had a dome at the bottom?
Well, I don't know. Never paid. It was buried. It was sitting in the dirt. This up here is where the door come down, though. It opened from right at the top out and just folded down.
So how long were you there before the military got there?
Oh, about 5 hours, 5 or 6. It was burning. That's why we went up there.
What part was burning?
The trees were burning.
Aztecs residents believed that it was an aircraft making an emergency landing. Scott Ramsey's investigation suggests the possibility that it was the police who informed the Army of the crash of the alien ship. Others think that it was the neighbors in the area that alerted authorities.
Who actually called the military? Or did you call the sheriff?
Didn't call the military. I don't know who called them. I think that rancher called them.
Yeah.
He called, I don't know whether he called the military or not, but I think he called sheriff's department. Because they come out from Farmington or from Aztec before any of those others ever showed up.
Who came out from Aztec?
Sheriff.
Did he look inside it?
I think he did. I think he did.
Finally, the military arrived, confiscated the bodies, and took control of the site. Witnesses claim they were taken and locked up as prisoners, as Doug Nolan recalls in this unpublished recording.
There was about 3 of them all showed up together.
They were in a Jeep or?
No, they come in a staff car from, I guess they came in from Durango. I don't know where they come in from. They come in on the road.
They came down from, but they came down from the north?
I don't know which way. We just saw them coming up from a ranch. They just come right on in.
They come up,
going.
and you're all standing around. What do they do?
Told us to get away from that thing. Said you're not allowed up here.
A story that was all but forgotten, and thanks to the work of researchers like Scott and Suzanne Ramsey, have now come forward with details never before revealed. After 25 years of research, they have uncovered factual evidence of this fascinating discovery, all documented in detail, of one of the greatest stories of all time. Only a small group of people witnessed this event, most of them inhabitants of the area, and some workers of the oil industry and firemen. Eventually, all of them would be millionaires, but nobody wanted to talk about this case.
We can clearly see here where the UFO was coming from.
Yes, it came from that area down there after it had been in Cuba that night, Cuba, New Mexico. It basically followed the terrain of Highway 44, which is valleys and canyons. It came up through Largo Valley, or Largo Canyon, the Largo Basin. It came across what is now basically Highway 173 or State Route 173. Went over the Archuleta Ranch. Appeared to be in trouble at that point. To quote Valentine Archuleta, it fluttered like a leaf. It bounced off the canyon wall of the mesa and went on a trajectory of northeast. If you take a straight line from here to Valentine Archuleta's ranch, that would bring you to right about here. And then, as the witnesses tell us, it ended up over there.
This is the place?
The epicenter is about right here. The witnesses I talked to said that it was at an angle and that all the silt was pushed up kind of like you'd imagine if you took your hand and ran it through sand. And it wasn't covered at all, but right around the one rim, it was pretty packed underneath it. But yeah, this is where it laid. Not much grows here anymore.
How tall it was?
18 feet.
And how wide?
Of 314 feet, using pi to 99 or 100 feet.
But it was an oval object, was circular object?
Lenticular, round. Right. It had a dome on top and a smaller dome on the bottom.
What was the color?
A pewter colored, kind of a brushed aluminum pewter. No seams, no rivets, no joints that were visible.
What is your conclusion in that sense?
Oh, my conclusion? That the event is real. It did happen, March 25th, 1948.
The grass never grew again there. The same thing happened in San Antonio, New Mexico. It is possible that the energy of these objects can sterilize the ground where they come to rest. It is really exciting to arrive at the same place where we now know that a UFO came down, specifically an extraterrestrial craft with at least 14 occupants, possibly all of them dead for unknown reasons.
Resulta realmente emocionante llegar al lugar donde hoy sabemos que descendió un objeto volador no identificado, concretamente una nave extraterrestre con al menos 14 ocupantes, muy posiblemente todos ellos muertos, por razones desconocidas.
To know that this place, a secret operation and investigation, was carried out by the United States Army is captivating. We understand today that the vast majority of people who not only live here in Aztec, but around the world, have continued to ignore this event.
The object was separated in three different sections.
That's correct. Well, 3 separate sections of the actual disc, and the cabin section is reported came out as another individual piece.
There were 4 then?
At least 4 pieces. The outer rim of the craft came in 3 pieces.
And they took it from here?
Mm-hmm. Straight up to the hill to where the concrete slab is. Reportedly then put and cradled on the flatbed trucks that we talked about. The M24 and M25 Dragon Wagon was the nickname. And then taken out through Largo Canyon down to Liebrook. And once they got to Liebrook, they had open road wherever they were going to go. You could have taken this road back then in through Aztec. It wasn't a good road, and then you would have, whatever you had on the big trucks, you would have exposed to the population. This way, there's, to this day, if we go down that way, there is very little population. Just northwest of Liebrook, there's a small community. But you're not going to advertise you have this on the back of your truck.
How did you find this place?
Years of research. I got to give Bill Steinman credit. He found it. He was relatively certain this was the location. Some old timers had told us, they kept using the word Largo Canyon. Well, we're kind of at the entrance to what you could call Largo Canyon. Then talking, as we got into it more and more with the witnesses, this was designated the place. This is consistently referred to as the landing site, the recovery site, whatever you want to call it.
Is this a popular site now? Many people come here?
Yeah, it draws its own group of visitors. They have the alien bike run, which, as you can see, the bike tracks right through here. The area is owned by Bureau of Land Management, as you know from getting your permit. It's pretty well protected. We have some rare cactus that grow here throughout the whole mesa. You're not allowed on here with any motorized vehicles, no four-wheelers, motorcycles, dirt bikes, mountain bikes only, or your feet, no horseback riding. They're trying to preserve all the beauty of all this Bureau of Land Management land. And I think there's a good percentage of people that want to keep this area kind of clean and kind of sanitized. This was updated in 2007. The plaque was first put here in 2000. It was put here kind of near the event date. It was put here to recognize when people come out to the crash site that they are at the right spot. And we tell a brief story on it about what happened, to the best of our knowledge.
In this particular case, unlike the cases of San Antonio and Roswell, the ship did not crash, but descended to land on a plateau in the desert. Another mysterious fact is that the 14 to 16 alien beings inside the ship were already deceased when found. Apparently, something caused them to die before or as they were descending to Earth. Is it possible that the microwave radars used by the U.S. Army inadvertently brought their craft to the ground and caused the death of the beings? Later, that type of powerful radar was discontinued because it caused serious injuries to their operators and was suspected to interfere with airplanes' instruments. Even today, we acknowledge that strong microwaves and radiation can affect human health in a harmful way. We know that the radars operating in 1945 used up to 1 megawatt of power, which made it a lethal weapon for flying ships and their occupants. Over the years, it has been demonstrated that radars and microwaves are dangerous and should be handled with care. The case of Aztec seems to be a clear indication that microwaves literally cooked the beings inside their ship. Scott Ramsey was able to locate information on the radars that were used back then, evidence that included documentation in the FBI memorandum we have revealed that supports the reality that microwaves were indeed responsible for bringing down the objects that fell from the sky in New Mexico between 1945 and 1950. Evidence demonstrates the likelihood that strong radars interfered with the navigation system of the extraterrestrial spacecraft. The first of these bases was known as El Vado and operated until 1950.
El Vado Dam, or the entire El Vado Lake, was built prior to Los Alamos being completed. Los Alamos is right over the mountain range over there. They needed electricity at Los Alamos to do all the things they were doing, fusion, fission, splitting atoms, refining the plutonium. So what they did was you can see how this is hand carved, this whole lake. This is a man-made lake, and there's a GE hydroelectric generator just below that building that makes the power. And then the power was transmitted down these lines to Los Alamos.
The second microwave radar base was known as Tierra Amarilla, a military base that operated between 1950 and 1957. The development of new technology eventually made it obsolete, and the base was abandoned, not to be used since 1957.
How many people were here?
About 100. They worked 3 shifts. I think it grew to about 200 by the mid-50s and through 1957, when they were announcing that they were closing it and going with the DuLine radar system.
Why did they install these radars after the war?
These were here for one main purpose, and that was to protect Los Alamos, Sandia National Labs, and Kirkland Air Force Base. And if you look at where they are on a map, which we'll do later, El Vado was north, as far north. Moriarty was east, and Continental Divide was west.
They were afraid of what?
Well, we were at the beginning, we were actually well into the Cold War, so we were protecting these bases against espionage, spy planes, or bomber raids by the Soviets. We came looking for radar bases that had been talked about and people made reference to them, and we found this place back on January 8th of 1999. By accident, we're out for a week or 10 days looking for the quote-unquote secret radar bases, and accident. We had checked all these high points around this area.
How powerful was this radar?
Well, it was powerful enough that even though this was restricted airspace for private aircraft or commercial for that matter, there were manuals written on how to quickly shut the radar down if a private aircraft wandered into this airspace.
But this is an amazing discovery. You proved what nobody else could. We are very thankful because this is just the second time that a camera has
ever been here. Yeah, that's true.
All the evidence suggests that the possibility is that, as pointed out in Goy Hotel memo, 3 ships crashed, and not just one, in the vicinity of the Los Alamos nuclear power plant. In fact, there were 4, but one of them disintegrated in Roswell. However, 3 were recovered, 2 of them practically intact, or at least in one piece, as witnesses pointed out. I am Jaime Maussan, and I will see you in the next edition of Nuevo.
Gaia presented Nuevo with Jaime Maussan.